Hey everybody, welcome to another Bald Movie. Today we're talking about the 1992 film Sneakers, directed by Phil Alden Robinson and written by Lawrence Lasker and Walter Parks. You might recognize Phil as the director of Field of Dreams and Sum of All Fears. And Lawrence and Walter wrote a little film called War Games, which is going to be highly influential to the state of sneakers. It also just features a loaded cast. Robert Redford, Ben Kingsley, Sidney Poitier, David Strathern, Dan Aykroyd, River Phoenix, Mary McDonnell, Stephen Tobolowsky, James Earl Jones.
Yep.
I remember watching this film and liking it, but also realizing that this is a 30-year-old movie about hacking, and I thought it was I was expecting it to be pretty damn cringy. I was pleasantly surprised. How about you, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie.
This movie was a lot of fun to watch. The tech actually holds up a lot, I think. The hacking as depicted, because most hacking isn't people in dark rooms hammering on keyboards. At least, the kind of hacking that gets things done. A lot of it is social engineering. A lot of it is taking advantages of physical security. And this movie, I feel like, is really highly influential to many films that came later. Like, if Sneakers doesn't come out in 1992, do you get Mission Impossible? Do you get The Net? Do you get Hackers? Which all three of those very different films came out 3 years later in 1995. I don't know, but I was also really shocked at how good they got the depiction of hacking.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about some of the hacks that they do, and how realistic are they, and like for people who aren't into that kind of thing. Is this well, I guess the first question is this something that a general audience would appreciate? And I think it kind of was, and I don't know if that was based on the star power or what, but the budget was $35 million for this. Domestically, it made 51 or something. Worldwide, it made over 100. So I think that's a success.
Yeah.
Now, that might have been just on the back of Robert Redford being in this movie, because he's one of the all-time great actors that we have in Hollywood. A lot of people will go see a movie just for him, but yeah, as someone who is familiar with that technology, and specifically like that era of hacking, because this is like right around the Kevin Mitnick time, when he was sort of on the run or just became a fugitive.
Yeah, he'll be arrested in 95.
Yeah, and so a lot of people were talking about this,
for his
right?
crimes he committed during the movie Hackers.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so this was in the media, right? This was super popular as far as like the general consciousness, the public consciousness goes, and it was intriguing to people. But I don't know if they knew how it worked, and so like you'd expect, you look at Hackers from 95, 3 years later, it's a joke.
This is ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, nobody is using an interface where they're flying around virtual skyscrapers to try and hack something and look at files. Nobody's doing that. It's all command line shit and like maybe a little bit of GUI stuff. But here you've got like a lot of physical hacking, and that was the thing that to me was so interesting, like social engineering, interrupting or intercepting camera feeds, going in and fucking with like the ambient temperature in a room, listening to things and sort of deducing like who might be in that office and how we would get a hold of their credentials and stuff. All that
surveillance,
stuff.
like a lot of it's just surveillance and detective work,
information gathering, right?
Exactly.
Like, and understanding the process that they go through so that you can figure out how to break that process.
Yes.
And that it's super fascinating to me, and it's super realistic. It's the way things got done.
It's still the way
things get done.
Yeah.
In the hacking. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say the word. I shouldn't say the H word.
The sneaking.
It's sneaking, right? It's sneaking. And I think it's funny because, it was so in the media. I wonder if they didn't want to call this hacking, because I don't know that the word hacking is ever
used.
That's
the thing. Like, when I was reading Roger Ebert's review, which he didn't like this film. He thought it was pretty mediocre. And I can kind of see some of his points. But I also think that this movie was just a bit ahead of its time, because I don't think people had the I think this movie was building the dialogue for those people. Because the background of this film is these writers who worked on the movie War Games, where, it's hilarious to me that they did all this background research into phreaking and phone hacking and all that stuff that was essentially, 5 or 10 minutes of the plot of War Games. But it clearly captured their imagination, and they're like, oh no, how can we get this into this is really fundamentally interesting, which is true. Like, this stuff is, and it's true to this day. Like, Mr. Robot, to what it claimed it got was largely on the back of Rami Malek's enormous eyes and the realistic feeling and, in fact, depictions of hacking.
Yeah.
And they just kept on trying, and it took them 10, 12 years to get the right script and the right, I guess Robert Redford signing on was how they got Phil Alden Robinson, because that was like a Mount Rushmore guy that he wanted to work with, and it all came together. But when I look at Roger trying to describe, like, what are these guys? Is this industrial espionage? Is how he described them. And it's like, now it's like, well, no, these guys were white hat hackers, or they're penetration testers, or...
And part of hacking is sort of inherently an espionage kind of thriller film, right? If you're going to do the interesting parts of hacking, the hooks are there for espionage.
Right. So I just feel like that maybe they went with sneakers because they're like, well... hacker, what does hacker even mean? But people sneak. But it's so funny to hear, like, River Phoenix crowing about, this is the biggest sneak in the world. It's like, if he just had hack, it would have been exactly right.
I can see that for the title. Like, maybe you don't want to scare people off, right? Yeah. Because, like, these are supposed to be the good guys.
Right.
The hackers in this movie, the sneakers, are the good guys.
Right.
And so you don't want the title to be hackers, because then the public goes, oh, I don't want to see a movie about a bunch of bad people doing bad things.
Right. Yeah.
Sneakers, you can almost be bamboozled into thinking, oh, well, this is a movie that's, an espionage thriller. And I like those. I'm a Tom Clancy fan,
Yeah, it's like if you had a cop film called Gangster, it's like, you're just
right.
kind of burying the real story there. Speaking of story, I thought maybe we could just give a real brief introductory to the plot. If you're like us, you haven't seen this movie in a long time, or maybe you haven't, and you just want to see if it's worth your while. So Robert Redford leads an all-star team of hackers, which this movie refers to them inexplicably as sneakers, as we just discussed. The NSA, National Security Administration, engages them to steal a box that's being developed by a brilliant mathematician who's being financed by the Russians, which is weird because they're supposedly our friends in this era, which is a part of the plot. One of the very first post-Glasnost movies. You get the idea that this is kind of like a quantum computing type technology before they had the name for quantum computing. The NSA feels this could be the ultimate hacking technology, laying bare all our secrets and exposing vital systems like air traffic control, Federal Reserve, and the nation's power grid to nefarious foreign powers. There's a lot of twists and turns in this movie, as you might expect, about things involving hacking and information exchange and blackmail. With hackers posing as Russians, posing as NSA goons, stealing technology from the actual NSA goons. But ultimately, Redford's character will be forced to make difficult choices regarding freedom and privacy and of his fellow citizens compared to the personal safety of him and his friends. And that's what makes the tension of the film largely work. And I'm not going to spoil it for you because I could say another sentence that would. But I think, like I said, if you're a fan of Mr. Robot or you're a fan of these types of movies, this is interesting in the exact same way that, like, Citizen Kane is if you're into cinematography. You can see, like, oh, that's where Tom Cruise dangled upside down in front of a computer terminal. Oh, this is the scene where Elliot talked his way into the Iron Mountain facility. Like, these movies directly, in many cases, just rip off these scenes, and sometimes, like, Mission Impossible will add like $10 million of glitz to it.
Yeah.
So where Robert Redford is moving 2 inches per second and just sweaty, Tom Cruise will be wearing thermal spandex with Jean Reno and an air shaft and, catching drops of sweat. So I think it's pretty good. I want to talk about, like, I've basically got my notes broken into things I liked versus things I didn't like.
I got one more thing to mention.
I do too.
It's just sort of a bald move note before we get to the spoiler stuff where people tune out.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened here, but the last movie we did, Universal Soldier,
yeah,
and this movie take place each of them take place in 2 time periods.
Oh, you're
They're the
right.
exact same years, 1969 and 1992.
Probably the exact same amount of prologue too. You got 10 minutes in 1969 Vietnam, 2 minutes of or 10 minutes in 1969. What? Where are they at? MIT.
They're at some college, which I found out is actually the clock tower from Back to the Future.
No shit.
They use, yeah, when you look at the external shots.
Yeah.
Kinda
Interesting.
cool.
We are in a bit of a 1992 hole unintentionally. We had
Yeah.
Groundhog Day, Universal Soldier, Sneakers.
Don't know how that happened.
Yeah. I also had one other note just in the kind of production behind the scenes details that I found. The director of this film, Phil Robinson, received a visit from men claiming to be representatives of the Office of Naval Intelligence. And they indicated for reasons of national security, the film could not, by any stretch of the imagination, include references to a handheld device that can decode codes. And I guess this guy was freaking out because that device was the key to the plot. And he went and consulted with lawyers from the studio. And then they did some research and they realized that the visit was just a prank that Dan Aykroyd pulled off.
Oh, mother. Mother,
yeah.
Mother.
So let's talk about let's now, since you gave us a brilliant pivot to that, let's talk about the cast. This movie, for this $30 million experimental hacking movie, is just got a loaded cast.
Yeah.
Robert Redford as Martin Bishop, who then I think is called Martin Bryce or vice versa. He's introduced as kind of like, I guess, a Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark type, where he's like he's got a friend by the name of Cosmo he's the Steve Jobs to Cosmo's Wozniak.
Yeah, Kaz, and they call him Kaz every once in a while.
Yeah, I wonder if their research is like they're kind of hinting at that, because this guy's very good looking, but they're both united by their love of technology and their love of 60s counterculture.
Yeah,
because they're essentially stealing money from the Republican National Committee and they're sending it to the Black Panthers and to other organizations, and they get busted. But I thought it's interesting. Robert Redford is the movie coasts a lot on Robert Redford's charm,
and he is very charming,
and that's his character. He is the charming one.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's why, when you ask the question later, why do I always get roped into like doing the hard thing, like walking across the floor at 2 inches per second? It's because you don't really bring much else to the table, right? Like
if you're not the smooth one, then what are you doing here?
Yeah.
It also has Ben Kingsley, which this is where we're starting to get to the big spoilers. Yeah. He plays Cosmo. Now, I knew as soon as Cosmo gets arrested in the film that he was going to eventually come back.
Yeah.
And I think Ben Kingsley does a really good job of playing this kind of like nerdy, but he's also, because he's rocking the ball guy ponytail, but he also is wearing like Armani suits, so it's like he's the upgraded version of Wozniak. Like Wozniak, if he spent a couple years in prison, faked his own death, and has been working for shadowy multinationals ever since.
Yeah, I feel like there's a change somewhere where like, okay, maybe they were going for a Woz thing with Ben Kingsley's character Cosmo in the 1969 era, but in 1992 he's come so far from that, in my opinion. Like the other thing I liked about the hacking part, and this kind of ties into the characters, is when Robert Redford at the end says, this isn't a journey we started going on, this was a prank. Like that's a spirit of hacking that I think is missing in a lot of movies about hackers, and it very much changed, I think, over the years. Like maybe they were on the same page about that in the beginning, but by 1992, after being apart for 25 years or whatever,
I think that's like a generational thing with hackers too, because I saw it like back when the anonymous group hackers, the anonymous hacking group Anonymous, like targeted like bigger profile things like Scientology. It split the movement into like, hey, we're just doing this for the lulz versus, hey, but we actually could do some good here. And I think Cosmo is the idealist. It's like, information wants to be free, man. And Robert Redford's just like, well, we were just fucking around. It's hilarious to give Republican money to the Black Panthers.
And he does it again at the end of the movie, which is great.
Yeah, which this movie is also kind of prescient in that it presents a lot of things as kind of like joke scenarios that have largely come true in our time. But we'll get to that in a bit. Sidney Poitier plays this Donald Crease, who's this mysterious. He's like the straight man of the group. He gives the crew some legitimacy in that he was a former higher up in the CIA.
Kicks some ass when he needs to.
Yeah, we don't know why. Like, we find out at the end of the film, like, why, kind of, sort of, why he got out of the CIA.
Do we? I don't remember that because they ask him straight up.
This is one of my the weaker parts of the film. But that's he's kind of like combination serious tough guy muscle.
Yep.
You got David Strathairn playing Erwin Whistler Emery.
And I want to say I think the thing that Crease brings to the group as far as hacking goes is that he's familiar with the way the government operates.
Yeah.
And so he's able to like sort of lay out what would the government be thinking at any given moment if we're hacking against them.
They also implied he's got some contacts, like you know, like that can give him access or maybe keep him out of trouble from time to time. He's got sources. Strathairn plays this Whistler character. His deal is he's a blind guy.
He's a blind superhero,
and his task is to like detect just natively like sounds and tones coming from phone systems. And this is still the era of like analog phone hacking. Like
he's a phone freaker.
Exactly.
I mean, I buy a lot of what they do with his character.
Yeah.
They cross the line for me into superhero territory when they mention him hearing ultrasonic sounds, because by definition, ultrasonic sounds are unhearable by humans. Ultrasonic sounds are sounds that are not audible within the normal human range of auditory sensors. Like
being born blind or being blinded does not give you the ears of the dog. You know?
And that's such a trope. Like they do that all the time. They do it here. It was the one thing I didn't like about him, but like being more attuned to like listening to things, I get. Like if he were in that trunk that they put him in, that they put Robert Redford in, he would be able to tell you exactly where they went. Probably.
I agree. I even liked his nickname Whistler because that's kind of a callback to back when you could literally whistle a certain tone or frequency to get free long distance calls.
Like Captain Crunch kind of thing.
Exactly. Dan Aykroyd plays Darren Mother Roscoe. He is the lunatic, fringe conspiracy theory guy.
Hate it. I don't like Dan Aykroyd.
You don't?
No.
I don't like Dan Aykroyd too. I think he's good in this film though.
I've got too much of this conspiracy theory bullshit in my real life. I don't need it in my movies. Sorry.
That's true. That's true. What is his deal though? What does he bring to the group? Is he like? It seems like he's kind of like their generalist because like he doesn't do anything but annoy Sidney Poitier throughout most of this film.
He might be a hardware guy. Like he might be the guy who holds the probe while Whistler figures out what's
he's Whistler's eyes and hands in a lot of this film, so maybe that's what it is. But like other than that, you got River Phoenix as Carl Arbogast, and he's just the new guy. He's Mouse in the Matrix. He's the new guy in the crew. He's very excited, he's very eager. He's playing like hyper focused, kind of like you can tell he's attractive, but he doesn't know it, and he's probably going to annoy the piss out of a lot of women in his day. Mary McDonnell as Liz is essentially Robert Redford's girlfriend, and unfortunately she's pretty thin. I saw that in the original script they had her as a bank employee that got involved in the original kind of like the opening heist. That's the penetration test, and was kind of enamored with the group and starts helping them. But the problem is organically weaving her into this plot was taking so much time, and this movie already is dense as hell. Like I paused to get a drink and I thought we were like an hour and a half into the film. It was like 49 minutes. I'm like, holy shit. And not in like, oh my God, this movie is dragging. It's just like they really pack a lot into it.
They do.
So as a shorthand to get her into the group, they just made her this ex-girl. But it's very nebulous. Like her and Robert Redford were dating, but then they broke up somehow, but left in good enough terms. And Robert Redford's so good looking and charming that she lets him get away with shit. And
then she somehow gets him access to this conference, I think.
Yeah.
Where he can go see Janek.
Yeah, she's got a couple connections. That's how she gets back in the plot. And I it's funny because we were talking about this. You hate Dan Aykroyd, and I guess I thought I hated Mary McDonnell, but I only really hate her in Battlestar.
Okay, I was gonna ask you how you felt about.
I mean,
her
I
in this
like
movie.
her when we were doing a disaster marathon and she was in Independence Day. It's like she's really good president's wife.
Yeah.
I don't think that I can see the president of the United States loving her as a first lady, and I thought she was really good and charming and sophisticated in this film. I remember liking her a lot in Dances with Wolves, which was about 2 years before this movie came out.
Huh.
So they were riding a little bit of a Mary McDonnell high on this.
I was gonna ask you. You don't. Okay, maybe you like Mary McDonnell in this, but really the question is whose hair is more perfectly feathered, hers or Robert Redford's? They're essentially, they've got the same hairstyle.
It's so funny because my mom rocked this hairstyle through the 90s too.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I think a lot of men and women did.
And then Stephen Tobolewsky, what a year for him. Groundhog Day,
Right.
Sneaker. You're with one of the comedy greats, one of the dramatic legends. He just has a pure comedy role as a dyed-in-the-wool fucking nerd doing computer dating in 1992.
Yeah. Ooh, that's rough.
Yeah.
You're not getting a lot of Mary McDonald's on the computer dating scene.
You're not. Which
in
I love
92.
how Ben Kingsley instantly says a computer matched this guy with this girl.
You're getting a lot more Dan Aykroyd.
Exactly. They should have sent Dan Aykroyd. Well, no, Dan Aykroyd would not date Stephen Tobolewsky unless Stephen Tobolewsky was gay. Boy, they could have. They really could have been ahead of the curve there. If it turns out, like Whistler is reading the Braille report of the computer dating. They're arguing, sending Mary, but he's like, guys, he's gay. Send in mother.
Also, Stephen Tobolewsky playing a slightly different character than I'm used to him. Like, he was more on the ball and authoritative, like less nebbish than he usually is, I guess.
That's true.
Like, when he discovers something is up, he immediately just takes action, right?
Yeah,
Like,
he's a man of action.
I was kind of surprised by that because I thought he was going to be steamrolled a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, he's like kind of a clueless, and he arrives at this dim sum place, and he's what is he like picking his nose and cleaning his glasses, but
yeah,
and I think, but he's like not phased by how like attractive Mary McDonnell is. He's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, and
yeah, because it's a computer match. And I love how when they talk about the computer match, they're like, a computer matched him with her. I don't think so. Like, a computer is so good at fucking matching people in 1992 that it wouldn't possibly put them together.
Yeah, like a computer would not err or fail.
Ridiculous.
So that's the cast. I got James Earl Jones comes in as NSA head spook Bernard Abbott, but
one scene.
And the thing is I recalled that he played like the Admiral Greer character in a lot of different Tom Clancy films. In fact, I think he was the head spy for like 3 different versions of Jack Ryan in the Tom Clancy films. But I think that he was just kind of like not typecast, but like, oh, we need a guy with that comes in and believably plays this role. Oh, I know, it's James Earl Jones. So, I really enjoyed how economically they developed the characters in the firm. Like, they did a lot of clever things. Like, you get this heist and you think they've stolen all this money, and he just smoothly takes he walks the bag of money that they just stolen from this bank across the lobby into an executive office and says, well, your rent-a-cops are this, and you could probably tighten up this, and here's your money, and let's get paid. And then, the secretary that's cutting him the check kind of patronizes him about, it pays the bills, and she's like, not very well. And I think I looked at, he's getting paid $2,500 for this.
Oh,
not a lot of money even in 92 for the firm that he's running.
5 ways, like,
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it must have seemed pretty crazy, like in the 80s and early 90s, to convince people to pay you big money to like, because no one knew. Like, this is like the dawn. TJ Maxx hadn't happened yet. Sony hadn't happened yet. Like, the credit card security hadn't become a multi-billion-dollar kind of enterprise. The way they're getting excited about a client is there's like, hey, we've got 2 guys in the office, potential clients, and Redford says shoes. And River Phoenix is like expensive. Like, you get the idea. These guys are kind of like money grubbing, ambulance chaser. Yeah, very, very hard Scrabble. The way they work in little jokes, like when Robert Redford's trying to improvise this backstory about being a private eye. When he's got mixed up with this mathematician's mistress.
Yeah.
and Whistler's feeding him lines, and he's just repeating verbatim, and he's like, and give him head whenever he wants. And I thought that was really funny to show, like, even in serious situations, they kind of fuck it.
It's that joyful spirit.
Yeah, and how like the NSA, they give enough of the backstory that like you just effortlessly believe that the NSA can box him into doing this potentially dangerous, but also you already have established that these guys are poor. They all have mysterious backgrounds that want to be hidden, so the NSA can waltz in here with like, what is it, $200,000?
Yeah, 175. And I was wondering about that when I was watching this movie. I'm like, okay, 175 split 5 ways. That's like $30-something thousand each.
Yeah. But for a couple of weeks' work, when they just got paid $2,500 for the bank job.
But they're also risking their lives, and they make a point to like say, okay, well, it might not be like a big risk, but it's a risk of your entire life. Like you might be killed doing this.
Right.
But then but I guess I just wasn't converting this into $92 because they played Stephen Tobolowsky's credit card, Warner's credit card, as having $750 limit as being kind of like a big deal. And I'm like, God damn, I have many times that in credit card limit, right?
Yeah.
On my credit cards today, but maybe back then $750 on a credit card was like blow your mind kind of thing.
Yeah, I was trying to do a real quick calculation what it would be, and it was stymieing me. Oh, I guess this is about $400,000, but still, not a lot of money.
It's only like 80 grand.
Not retired to the Cayman Islands money, but it's a lot to these guys, I guess.
Yeah, a couple of years of salary probably.
Yeah, I like that this is one of the first movies, because the Russia fell in the late 80s. This is one of the very first movies that kind of plays that will become a staple of like James Bond and Mission Impossibles and stuff like that, where like, oh, the Russians are our friends now, but there's also, you don't just go from being bitter enemies for generations to like best friends. Can you trust this guy? Oh, this guy's the head of the KGB, and now he's a cultural attaché.
Right.
And it sets up some effective tension where Robert Redford's in the middle of this movie. Of course, it's also 3 layers deep into a plot, but he's like, there's this moment of tension where he's in this Russian ambassador's car, and like, wow, do I surrender myself to these FBI goons or do I take my chances with the Russians? What does that mean? And I think that it especially worked in the time, and it was kind of neat, like seeing these things being played with. And now it's like, Russians are back to being the bad guys now, I guess. It's been a rough 30 years for our new relationship. The hacking. The hacking is, they did clearly a lot of meticulous research for war games, and it would have been like if they had done this movie. Well, I don't know. This movie's not really that dated even by modern standards. Maybe like the terminal technology is bad. You don't literally encryption doesn't work by seeing a screen full of line noise that slowly dissolves into readable text.
Right.
But the social engineering where they get River Phoenix, hey buddy, I gotta deliver this case of bullshit, and I could mean my job, and Robert Redford's like picking up a cake, and
they're causing that chaos that will humans get frustrated by, and
the guard's like, oh, this guy came down and asked me about the cake, so he must be here, and now he's got the cake, and there's a lot of that. And then I think they did a good job where River Phoenix comes in as a gardener, say, hey, can I use the John? And then the guy doesn't come out, and then the guard's smart enough to see that and start making phone calls. But then there's Dan Aykroyd wearing the elaborate get-up.
Yeah.
It's just like there's a couple scenes like that in the final season of Mr. Robot. It's like they really made the opposition seem smart, which made the hack seem more impressive.
Right.
That they're actually anticipating all this stuff. The fact that, they anticipated being traced, and they're like routing the signal through all these proxies, bouncing it off satellites. Like, I thought that was really cool and ahead of the time. Just a really good, like you said, the really good surveillance.
Yeah, that scene where they deduce who works in the office next door to Cosmo's box.
Yep.
Is really, really good.
Yeah.
Aside from, turning Whistler into a superhero who hears ultrasonic sounds.
Sure.
Like looking at, okay, let's time when these lights go off in the office
Yeah.
and who comes out the door in the next X minutes.
And then doing over several days, do you see the pattern?
Iterate through until you narrow it down to the point where you've got one guy who must work in that office.
Yeah.
Super smart.
Really, really smart. And the fact that they had to have Mary McDonnell swipe Stephen Tobolewsky's keypad, but they also needed his voice ID. So she's part of the ridiculousness of the date is her trying to get him to say all these words,
right?
And then the one that she needs is passport, and that I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. I love your voice.
Yeah. And
really, I thought it was nasally impinged.
And then the sensor senses body heat and motion. So like Robert Redford, they pump the office to like 98.6 degrees, and then he has to just manually move at 2 inches per second.
Yeah,
which is a little hokey to watch, but it also generates some real drama.
Absolutely, yeah. The way that they use, like, the tension of him just not being able to move quickly is one thing, but when he's discovered and they tell him, you gotta hurry.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's the one thing I can't do.
Yeah.
The tension just goes through the roof.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And I thought the fact that she's on this date with Stephen Tobolewsky, and they introduce him that he's a cybernetic guy and he's working on these cyber pets, because that's the cover story. It's a toy company.
Yep.
And these are voice activated pets, and how he gives her directions to their bathroom where she's trying to call to get out of there. And that makes the rabbit, the rabbit follows his voice directions, knocks her purse off, and she sees. There's a lot of stuff was really, really clever, I thought. I thought the Ben Kingsley stuff was really smart. This is pre-GoldenEye, but this is exactly the same setup as GoldenEye. Like, he is Janice, the 006, Sean Bean.
Yeah, the dead agent.
For King or Country. For King and Country, Marty. This GoldenEye relationship they had was good, but maybe not good enough, as we'll talk about. And just lots of good twists. Like I said, that part where he's caught between the Russians and what he thinks is NSA, and then them framing him for the death of the murder or of the Russian.
By doing essentially a hack, putting his real name into the database as an alias.
Yeah.
Or his alias into the database under his real name.
Right.
That stuff's good. They do a lot of really smart just filmmaking stuff, and you said how well this movie is constructed and how dense it is, but in those dense moments, they're not just info dumping at you, right? Mm-hmm. They're doing a lot of really like thematically interesting things. Like one of the big ones that I noticed is when we're introduced to Mary McDonnell's Liz, the first time we see her, she's sitting at a piano, and Robert Redford looks at her, and there's this beautiful piano music playing, this intricate, detailed thing. He notices, her body isn't really moving, and it's kind of strange that she could be playing this without her body moving. And then he walks closer, and there's this little girl playing this music behind the sheet,
right,
that he can't see. And it's like this idea of things not being quite what they seem, or like the idea that you need to take a closer look at things before you judge them, right?
Yeah.
It's really thematically interesting to me. There are other moments where, like, I think two characters in the movie use the same line where they basically say, "You'll have to trust me." Mm-hmm. And one of them is Ben Kingsley at the end, where he's talking to Marty. And then the other one is this Russian Greg guy who, later in the car offers him asylum. But in the one scene where they're like in the pool area or something, he's come and got him from a concert.
Yeah.
He says like Marty, and he steps into a shadow. Like normally you see people stepping out of shadows into things, but he steps into a shadow and says, "You'll have to trust me."
Yeah.
And it's just like this moment of, fuck, that's so confusing, and it's so perfect.
Yeah.
The filmmaking really ties into the whole feeling and story here, and it's
I noticed there's
really
a lot
good.
of other interesting, like, skewed perspective scenes. Like, there's a shot of Ben Kingsley ordering his henchmen around, and it shoots from the like looking down on him. That's this triangular desk, and it's very angular and dark and shadowy. There's a lot of things they're doing with that as you said, fit the theme.
And you mentioned that one other thing, the bank scene at the beginning where he's doing the penetration test.
Yeah.
You said how smoothly it goes from like them getting the money to them sort of revealing what the whole thing is. And one of the shots that they use that really confused me, I was like, what are they doing? Where is he going? Is when he walks up the stairs. He takes that money, the briefcase full of money, and he walks up the stairs. And I'm thinking, like,
that's not how
is
you
this
get
bank
it.
underground?
Right,
Is this a basement bank? What is
yeah.
this? Is that more secure? Maybe, I don't know.
Uh-huh.
And then he walks in the office, and I'm like, oh, I see. So it's just like this moment of confusion that's created just by the cinematography and the way the shot's staged.
Yeah.
Really good stuff.
We talked about just kind of how this movie is prescient, and there's a couple speeches that Ben Kingsley gives about, the world doesn't run on reality, it runs on perception
And information.
and how you can use that to take down banks, stock exchanges, small countries.
Yeah.
And that people that control secrets and information are going to be the ones. And I keep thinking about, like, what we found out with the Snowden leaks and what the NSA has been capable of and what they're doing and still doing. Like that came and went, and no one, like, I always felt like those types of those things are always portrayed in a movie. Like, a man starts shouting on the streets, like, the NSA is reading our emails, and then, like, things happen. Congressional hearings are, and
Right.
people are frog marched out of offices, and none of that happened.
No.
And yet we see, like, the real attacks that countries are putting on each other. Like, if you got a big country going against a small country, the big company just curb stomps the small country from the air.
Yeah.
But, like, when the big countries go against each other, they're destabilizing their currencies, they're destabilizing their power grids, they're destabilizing their elections, their faith in their institutions, they paralyze them with self-doubt, manipulate information. Like, this stuff was kind of played as, like, an out there kind of, like, hippie hacker fantasy, and it's a reality that we're living in.
Absolutely. And it's on every level. It's at the two big countries going at each other. It's on the companies going at the public. Like, you look at Amazon and Facebook and how information drives those businesses. I mean, down to places like Target. Yeah, that's a big company, but not nearly that scale.
Yeah.
Like, they analyze everything you buy.
Yeah.
Every single thing you do is analyzed by somebody somewhere, and they're using that to make money off of you or control you in some way. And it's just a reality that we live with now.
Well, and also it's not even nation state so much as, like, Vladimir Putin is the leader of Russia, but he's also one of the most wealthy men in the world. And he's going to, like his power emanates from that more than it does any political process. And you're seeing, like, in the United States right now, 2020, like, Mike Bloomberg literally buying his way into our democratic process.
Yeah.
These shadowy oligarchs that you're always hearing about. It's like, these aren't even countries anymore. These are just like we've kind of returned to this techno feudalism where these lords are just playing these power games against each other as Game of Thrones, and we're the small folk.
Yeah. We're a tool to be used in their game. Sure.
It's fascinating to see the proto versions of this play out in the film and how it feels. Like I said, watching it in 2020 is a goddamn trip. I also because we just watched Armageddon, where, like, everyone has their big asks.
I have the Armageddon scene in my notes too.
We don't want to pay taxes.
But this is the original Armageddon scene.
As far as I can tell,
3 years later.
This is the OG. Like, they all have, like, Dan Aykroyd wants his Winnebago, and Sidney Poitier wants to see the world with his wife. And I wondered, because, like, the big question I had is, like, this is 1992, and things weren't as woke as they were now, to the extent that they're even woke nowadays. But, like, River Phoenix, he wanted a girl.
Yeah.
And there's a pretty NSA agent, and I'm wondering, like, how are they going to, like, James Earl Jones surely isn't just going to, like, auction this girl's number off.
You give him your phone number.
But it's like, he's River Phoenix, so he's good looking. And the agent herself steps forward and says, you're the one that kind of, like, she's impressed with what he's done. So she they found a way to kind of square that circle where she's fine with it. Like, James Earl Jones, like, absolutely not. This is ridiculous. I'm insulted you even ask. And she's like,
Yeah,
he's
I mean,
cute. He's smart.
He can ask for anything here. and that's what he's asking for.
And that's impressive too.
It should it should either tell her that he really, really wants her phone number, or he's a fucking idiot.
Yeah. So I thought that was a pretty smooth way to handle it as far as those things go. And then Whistler asking for peace on earth and goodwill towards men, and James Earl Jones, we're the U.S. government. We don't do that sort of thing.
Right.
Hilarious.
Amazing.
And now I like to pivot to the stuff that maybe didn't work so well. It's not nearly as big of a list, but the primary problem I have is that Robert Redford gets out of a lot of situations where logically his face should have been blown open by a gun.
Yeah, that James Earl Jones scenario is the perfect example.
That's like that. I'm thinking of the situation where the Russians were in the car when Ben Kingsley's got him dead to rights, like the first time, the second time, and the third time on the roof.
Right.
You have to simultaneously believe that this Cosmo character can't quite bring himself to kill his very old friend.
Yeah.
And they to do the film's credit, they don't make it seem like he feels like he was sold out, you know, because like what are you supposed to do? Your friend gets gets nabbed by the cops. Are you supposed to turn yourself in some kind of like solidarity?
Yeah, it'd be futile.
And then Robert Redford thought the man was dead. So like there's no like, why didn't you ever come for me? You're a hacker. Why didn't you try to get word? But you got to believe that he can't quite kill his friend, but also he can credibly threaten his life. And he has to do it like 3 or 4 times in the film.
Yeah.
And a couple of times into this, especially once Robert Redford slammed, because I think the first time it's like, hey, this was our dream, man. We can do it together. And as soon as he slams the door shut on that, like to me, Cosmo should be looking to kill him. Because he clearly has no problems killing people. And they just didn't do enough with the relationship.
I think I agree there. I don't think that one scene in the beginning was quite enough to tell me that these are really, really good friends.
Yeah.
Because a lot of hackers, like especially when you compare the sort of nebulous relationships that the security consulting firm has, right? Like they're all willing to sell him out.
Yeah.
But they go along for the money.
Yeah.
And they make a point to say that. And so like hackers kind of roll that way in some cases. You know, there will be relationships where hackers are really close to others, but then there will also be ones where it's just essentially an opportunity, you know,
right?
And they're taking advantage of that, and who cares what happens to this other person? So yeah, they didn't do quite enough to sell that to me, but I was willing to give them the leeway.
I'm trying to think of like what they could have done better. Like, I don't know if maybe like they implied that Robert Redford's group had this like maybe anonymous hacker that's been their benefactor, and it turns out that that's been Cos the whole time, like helping them out, and then they could have a little bit more of a joyful reunion until you turn out that Cosmo's turned full black hat and like you know, apocalyptically evil. But I like I said, I don't know how you do it better. It's just say it's a tight, jam-packed script, and they just didn't quite do it for me. Seems like that's the thing that really pissed off Ebert too. Like, you know, there's a lot of times where Robert Redford gets a monologue when he should have got the bullet. Yeah. Kind of related, I don't buy Redford duping the NSA. Like,
in what way?
Well, so like the end of the movie, I was getting outraged because I'm like, so this movie's so like kiss ass to the U.S. government that Robert Redford can surrender this technology to them and we'll just be fine because we can trust the government.
Right.
Like, come on, this is post Watergate. What the fuck? And then he says, well, you know, the box doesn't work, right? And I'm like, what? We've seen this box work very, very well. And
you're just thinking like, well, they'll figure that out in a second. They'll try it and it'll work and your lie will be uncovered. And
as soon as James Earl Jones walks out the building, he like waggles the chip that does all that hard work. Right. And I'm like, so the NSA doesn't have computer engineers that can look at this technology and be like, well, the central thing that everything's hooked up to has been unplugged. Like there's a big socket that has this processor and the processor's gone, or there's all these connectors that have been cut. Like, come on.
And then go back to Marty and question him, right?
Like you're supposed to believe the NSA is like the government goons and Raiders of the Lost Ark. They're just going to take this answer machine, put it in a crate, never to be used, and then that's it. That's the end of it.
Yeah, it's a little silly. I think him pulling that chip out makes a lot of other things that I was prepared to hate
Oh
Okay.
yeah, I was ready to eviscerate Robert Redford's character for selling us all out 30 years
Absolutely.
before we actually got sold out.
Absolutely, but he does take the chip, and I think you're right. Like there will be further questioning, right? Like
Yeah.
he'll have to go back underground or something and hide from the NSA because they will be back for the extra part that they know they have to know is there.
Yeah, it's like if you sold Roger Penske a car that's like super fast car, and then they get its garage, it's missing its engine.
Yeah, I
And
know it
here-
never worked, right?
Yeah, you know the car never worked, right? Like, and you got the engine. There's this. Come on. Now this movie deservedly so gets a lot of praise for a lot of the hacking and the sneaking that they got correct. I want to talk about some of the things that not so good. First of all, man, fuck anagrams. This was pretty early in the anagram game. Like, there's not a lot of maybe it gets a little bit of a pass on that, but like C-Tech astronomy equals
Too many secrets.
cooties rat semen
Oh, yeah.
equals
That
too
was a
many
great
secrets. Like, it's a fun scene to see that it gives them something to do while Whistler's doing the actual important work.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just a scene of Dan Aykroyd being like, "Is this it, Whistler? Nope. Is this it, Whistler? Nope." So they're doing the Scrabble thing.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, I like it. It's a coming together of sort of like, what does this box do with also who might be behind this, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I thought it was an effective scene.
yeah.
You just really hate anagrams.
I hate
apparently.
anagrams. I really do.
But I like what they did in the credits because, like, okay, once you've got a movie that has anagrams in it, what are you gonna do with the credits? I thought it was really cool to have essentially the credits be anagrams, and ciphers for each of these people.
Yeah, we found out that your Jim Jones has no known English anagrams.
Not any good ones, certainly.
I don't think there's any, like, if you have to use
Like
all the
actual English
characters.
words?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like there's no, like, the Anagram internet generator returned no results. I've never seen it happen before. So that was kind of dumb. I really like the tracing scene, but this idea of a voice stress analyzer that's like, hey, it's not as reliable as a polygraph, but like, first of all, polygraphs aren't reliable. Second of all, you got this voice stress analyzer that's bouncing through a satellite and through ocean tunnels, and it's going to be able to tell whether James Earl Jones is lying just with a simple yes or no answer.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here.
I will say landline phones sounded a hell of a lot better than cell phones do today. A hell of a lot
Is
better.
that true?
Now, if you're bouncing them 50 times off of satellites and shit, probably not.
I'm trying to
The
think
more,
of, like, did they actually sound better back then
Oh,
than they
yeah.
do now?
oh yeah, like I listen to the podcast version now of the hacking show 2600 does. They actually have a couple of them, but they have recordings going back of the radio show 40 years in the past. And so, like, I went through not too many years ago and listened to some of those, and I remember the phone calls that you got on that show sounding so much better in the early 80s or late 80s, early 90s than it does now with cell phones.
Huh.
It just sounds like garbage. They're compressed.
Yeah.
The encryption and shit just gets in the way of the audio.
Yeah,
The
they said-
sampling rate's so low.
Like, Sprint used to advertise that on their long distance network you could hear a pin drop.
Right.
So I don't know if you could hear a pin drop on cell phones nowadays.
I don't know.
And then the dumbest fucking scene in the whole movie is Robert Redford, pretty spry. I like the scene where he tries to leap over like what is that, like a
It's the desk at the bank, the teller.
reception desk,
Yeah.
and he trips and falls, and he's like, "Oh, too old for this shit." Takes a header. This man has to get like 3 concussions this movie.
Oh yeah.
So he
Two
gets
in the same night.
he gets concussed twice in a row. But he's still with it enough it's stuffed in a trunk without anyone prepping, like, hey, listen and remember all this. Like,
Right.
like they're like, oh, they've got a complete dead end. They have no idea how to trace Cosmo back to his lair. And then Whistler says, well, what did it sound like? And he goes over to a keyboard and starts playing some road noise and starts like, does it sound like this? Does it sound like, oh, you must have gone over a bridge. What are the different bridges that was foggy that night? And then Robert Redford's just reconstructing this time he spent in the trunk. I think you said it best when we were talking about this before the podcast. You're like, if Whistler is in the trunk,
Yeah.
I'm buying this.
For sure.
But sonically reconstructing their trip and being able to identify the corporate location by his hazy, concussed, not superhumanly paying attention to sounds Robert Redford 56-year-old ears. I don't. That's just dumb.
I'm not buying it either.
It's dumb. But
what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
It's a cool idea that I just don't think works in this particular scenario.
And here's a part that's not dumb, but it's just not as cool as I thought it was going to be. Like the gag where they get the blind guy driving the truck. I thought he was going to run over the dudes, and that's how Sidney Poitier and who was it? Dan Aykroyd was going to escape. But what they do is the blind guy's driving backwards as hell, pell-mell to, I guess, rescue Robert Redford and River Phoenix and Mary. And then Sidney Poitier is left to escape from these guys holding him at shotgun point, and the way he does it is like, because they built this up all movie long. Why'd you get kicked out of the CIA? Why'd you get kicked out of the CIA? And he tells the mother, like, I've ever told you why I got kicked out of the CIA? Because of my anger issues. And he just raws the guy with the shotgun and disarms him.
Okay, I forgot about that moment. Yeah,
like the payoff of what I thought. Like I thought he was going to like do some James Bond shit, but he's just really mad, and that lets you get the jump. And it wasn't even like if it was coordinated with like the moment the blind guy. It just like all the elements were right there to have something pay off, and they just quite do it. Again, it's not terrible. It's just kind of like landed like a wet paper towel.
While we're talking about Sidney Poitier, you mentioned how woke this movie was for 1992. I was shocked to see within the first 15 minutes of this movie, there's a definite blackface moment in there, but they call it out like. It's a weird. It's clearly a joke.
It's not a black. It's so like River Phoenix is in a abundance of caution because he's the only person doing this on the team.
Yes,
he's got like all black fatigues on, and he's roughing his face. He's putting black camo on his face, like Vietnam jungle.
Yeah, just slathering it all
style.
over, like Arnold trying to keep himself from getting caught by the predator.
Right.
He's got it all over his face, and Sidney Poitier walks up, and he gives him like a look, like. What the fuck are you doing?
Yeah.
And it's not like that's a weird thing that you're doing kind of look. It's more like are you really doing blackface right now?
Borderline. And I think it could work both. Like he's a CIA guy and he's like, I can't believe you're putting on camo for this stupid thing. But also it's Sidney fucking Poitier. I mean, this guy they call me Mr. Tibbs. This is look who's coming to dinner. Like it's got to have a little bit of that in it too.
For sure.
Yeah.
You can see it on his face. He's sort of disgusted by what he's doing there.
Yeah, trying to decide how much offense he wants to take.
Yeah. I also like that they call the thing a black box because it's very hackery, right? It's like, there are beige boxes and red boxes and blue boxes. There's all colors of the rainbow boxes, but the black box is like...
And it's funny because like by not specifying the technology, it's evergreen because like you could say that's quantum because... They got the right idea. They knew that encryption was based on large, not what are they, non-prime numbers or prime numbers?
Yeah, like essentially unsolvable mathematical equations.
Ones that are like very, very computationally intensive to compute.
Yeah.
And that if you could find a way around that, a lot of people suggest quantum computing as a way to like make if quantum computing would take off the way they've been talking about it my entire lifetime. It's like, this 256-bit encryption can be broken in minutes rather than hundreds of thousands of years. But by not explicitly saying that, they got all the terms right. Like, well, this is how the encryption works. And if it was going to be broken, it would have to be through some kind of mathematical breakthrough. They could have called it something that would read ridiculous, but now you can just assume, that's like, quantum computing or something else. It keeps it to where it's like, well, they got the right idea for the problem space. They don't know what the solution is, so let's just call it a black box. Let's just call it a chip. Let's call it a universal decryptor because that's what it is, and that's how it works.
Speaking of all of that, terminology and explanation of how the box works or how encryption works, what did you make of Janik giving this speech? Because I don't see a real scenario in which he gives the speech about the box that is also not about the box because he can't. Like all he does when he gets up on stage is says, "What if?"
Yeah.
Like that's his magic thing is like he's essentially saying encryption's hard to break. and he's not saying anything about how you might actually approach breaking it, because he's done the thing. He's created the box, but he's not there to tell you that he created the box and here's how you do it, which a lot of hackers would do.
Yeah.
And he's also not having the conference, which a lot of like ruthless sort of opportunity mongers would do, right?
Right.
He's out there like telling you nothing while trying to say something.
Yeah. It's weird. It's almost like like the conference we walk in on David not David Spade. James Spader, right? In Stargate. Is that his name?
Okay, yeah.
He's giving this speech about where like, aliens and pyramids but he clearly doesn't have the answers. He's missing a whole bunch of, there's a whole bunch of ... question mark profit.
Right.
Imagine if he did that after the events of Stargate.
Right. Okay.
Like this guy's doing that version of like, whoa, who knows? But it's also weird because he's also developing this technology for these quasi shadowy national governments, but he's loudly advertising that he's kind of got a breakthrough.
Yeah, or that there's a breakthrough possible.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense why he would hold that conference or give that speech, I guess.
But then again, I think you're also understanding that, is he developing this just because he's developing it for fun? But someone's funding his research, and they make it seem like it's the Russians. It's actually the NSA. But Cosmo wants to steal it.
And I have questions about who he works for, if anyone, or does he just work for himself?
I think he works for himself. Like he's in it for the chaos. He's in it for democratizing data, I guess. I mean, information wants to be free, man.
He's very organized crime, though, too, because like he makes that allusion. Maybe I work for organized crime, and Bishop's not buying it. But then later on, he says, I can't kill my very good friend. Kill my friend.
Yeah,
to his goons. Like that's a very organized, that's a very mob boss thing to do, right? Like,
yeah.
So maybe he has connections to organized crime. Or maybe he doesn't. Where does he get all his money?
I think he probably does. Like, he doesn't care.
He's very well funded.
Because money doesn't matter to him. Like, the money matters as a means to an end to get this. But, like, he's post-money. He's, like, in the information economy, baby.
Is he post-money because he's wielded the information so well that he's stolen?
He's already said, like,
stolen money?
Because, like, when Robert Redford's like, you could take down banks. And he's like, yes. He's like, you could take down stock exchanges. Yes. You could take down...
So he's getting a lot of those $2,500 checks for.
I think he's like he's stolen money from warlords in Africa, and he's stolen money from stock exchange. He's stolen money from banks. Like he's got essentially, if he needs money, he goes and gets it, and which, Robert Redford could do that too. Like we saw him walk out with like $1 million. That's the funny thing is like also he walks out with like $1 million, but he takes home $2,500 for
right.
So, crime pays, I guess.
And when they have that conversation about like banks, countries, they're sitting. They use a couple of really cool things there. They're sitting on a Cray supercomputer.
Yes, as a lounge.
Right. It's super awesome because like if you're not a hacker, you just think, oh, look at this weird decor he's got.
Yeah, it's like this
in this glass room and what the hell.
Future, yeah.
Right, but if you do know computer hardware, you're realizing I'm probably looking at a supercomputer here. I went and I looked up the actual model. It's a Cray Y-MP because I wanted to know because I'm curious. I'm a weirdo. But I thought that was cool. And then when they're using the telephone to hook up to their computer systems to the telephone lines, they're using a device that was designed for Atari 400 and 800 computers called like an Atari 830 modem, which I was super curious about because I didn't realize Atari ever made, because it looks a lot like an Atari console, like a video game console.
Yeah.
I didn't realize they had made like phone interfaces for their computers that were like that.
Yeah. I remember the first time I had seen someone get on a BBS, it was at one of my friend's house, and his dad was like essentially fucking Radio Shack. Like this is in the early 80s. He was flying remote controlled helicopters. He's a ham radio guy.
Nice.
And this new thing he was into is BBS. And he actually had this thing that you physically strapped to the phone. You took the phone off the hook, you strapped it onto the speaker thing, and it was like a like a pair of headphones that you strap to the microphone and receiver of this thing.
Yeah, it's called an acoustic coupler, and it essentially like translates the dial tones and the numbers and stuff into the computer through.
Yeah, and it was operated at like 180 baud, which if you know anything, holy fuck. wait for 30 seconds to wait for like a page of a novel to load.
Yeah, you can type faster than that.
Much faster. Yeah, that's my old analog shit is super cool, which is why it works so well in like Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Do you got anything else you want to say about this year's sneakers?
I don't think so.
That really desperately wants to be called Hackers.
It really does.
It's a fun movie. It's a nice little slice in the 90s. It holds up because the world has conformed into its shape in the last 30 years.
Yep.
I think it's worth your while to check it out. Next week we're going to be back with The Invisible Man.
Yeah, this is a first run movie.
It's a first run bald movie, so that means we're going to have a non-spoiler discussion of it for everybody, and some discussion of upcoming trailers and movies, and then we'll have a spoiler-filled version of the movie review for our club members. It stars Elizabeth Moss. Looks like it's going to be a really interesting psychological thriller. It's another chance to see Elizabeth Moss lose her shit in various ways on film, which she's made a cottage industry of doing the last few years. So I'm excited for that. We'll be back for that next week. Hope you enjoyed this one. Until next time, I'm A.Ron.
I'm Jim.
See ya.